Hello and welcome to my session, Get Rid of Recurring Management Tasks with PowerShell in 5 steps. So in the next 45 minutes, I want to show you how you can use PowerShell as the foundation for automating all kinds of IT management tasks, start delegating, standardizing them, and we will take a look at a couple of examples. So it will be a few slides, and then we're going to look into some real life examples, so to speak. Yeah, so my name is Heiko. I am a product expert at ScriptRunner. In ScriptRunner, we've been around since 2014, and our goal is to simplify the way you develop, manage, and delegate PowerShell. So here are a few numbers. Plus 49. So we are based in Germany. As I said, we've been around since 2014. We're about 25 people, 24 to be exact. And the last number here, 1819. This is the number of scripts that we provide for free on our GitHub repository. So if you are maybe new to PowerShell or you want to get some inspiration on what you could do with PowerShell, please feel free to go to github.com/scriptrunner/action-packs. I'm also gonna type in the information into the chat, so please feel free to download them and yeah, play around. You can see there are examples for all kinds of platforms, of course, Office 365, Azure, but also Active Directory, Exchange, VMware, Citrix. So all kinds of platforms are covered. Another thing that we offer, again, no matter if you're new to PowerShell or if you're working with PowerShell on a daily business, we have a whole bunch of PowerShell, of free PowerShell goodies, actually. And one is a PowerShell cheat sheet. We have also cheat sheets for Teams and for Exchange. And we have also a PowerShell security ebook, which might be very interesting for you as well, given that we just had this very infamous Uber hack where PowerShell was involved. And I will come back to this topic later on when we talk about credential management. All right, so that's for the start. If you have questions, please feel free to put them into the chat. I try to have a look at it and try to answer them, of course. So what I want to talk about and the things I want to show you is, number one, talk about PowerShell in general and how it can help you to automate all kinds of recurring tasks. So what you can do with it, but also going to take a look at and talk about the challenges that might be there when you start using PowerShell or if you're using PowerShell in general. And in the second part, we're going to take a look at how ScriptRunner can help you to unlock the power of PowerShell in the sense of really make it something where it's not just a command line interface thing and a great technology, which it is, of course, but also something that maybe other people in your organization can really benefit from. Now, starting with the question, why using PowerShell at all? Of course, take a look a little bit at the history. So it's been around since 2006. So it's really a mature command line shell, but it's of course also a great scripting language for automating all kinds of different tasks and systems. So, and of course, one of the things that's really all about is consistency, to make sure the things are happening exactly the same way all the time, instead of if you're clicking through the GUI and making sure, are you checking the right boxes every time? Having a script that does all the stuff that you want to do over and over again, exactly the same way. That's of course, one of the great things when you use PowerShell. And then it's really about simplifying the whole processes and talking about the infrastructure in general. And which means we have, of course, Microsoft being committed to PowerShell, but we have a lot of other vendors that also support PowerShell with modules. And last but not least, we have a great worldwide community where people helping each other, where they are also people providing additional modules maybe for platforms that are not covered by vendors. So if we look at the PowerShell ecosystem, we can see on one hand, again, of course, Microsoft with all the modules that covers all their on-prem, all their cloud solutions where you can, use PowerShell right away. But then again, we have a lot of other major vendors like VMware, like Citrix, like Google, like AWS, Cisco, and so on, that also allows you to manage this kind of system based on PowerShell, which means once you have started to learn PowerShell, it becomes something that helps you in your career. And no matter what comes along, when you're familiar with PowerShell, it really doesn't matter what you want to manage, as long as you have a basic understanding how PowerShell works. And then from the community perspective, there are also very interesting, very helpful PowerShell modules. For example, the DBA tools for managing SQL Server. We have modules for creating HTML reports, stuff like that. So really, really a strong and very vital ecosystem around PowerShell. And it's growing. And because Microsoft made PowerShell open source a while ago, and now having PowerShell 7 also not just running on Windows, but also on systems like Linux and Mac OS, we can see exactly the use of PowerShell 7, and together with doing things also not only in the Windows world, being really something that starts to really being used quite a lot. I have two pictures here. So the one on top is I did take a look at the Power BI report in beginning of 2021, where I wanted to take a look at how much PowerShell 7 is really being used. So the range here was in the 100 millions, and I did it end of August this year, and now we are almost in the area of the billion. So you can really see that this is used more and more, and we will see PowerShell 7 will become the standard at one point in time. And we know that the PowerShell team at Microsoft is heavily working on bringing PowerShell 7 and making PowerShell 7 the standard in the Windows world. That still might take a little bit, but they're on the way. All right. So besides PowerShell being a great technology, of course, there are also some challenges, which is like, okay, obviously not everyone is into scripting and likes to script and loves to be on the command line and working with commandlets and the pipeline and stuff like that. The other another challenge that we see quite often is what I call here the decentralized use of PowerShell, meaning the scripts are all over the place, right? They are on network shares, on OneDrive, maybe in emails, whatever. And the same is for the modules. So oftentimes PowerShell is something that is really kind of, in many different places, which kind of makes it difficult to really think about having PowerShell as a centralized cornerstone for your automation strategy. And then besides the technical topics, also, of course, questions come up like, okay, when I'm using PowerShell, that's great, but how can I enable other people to use what I have done with PowerShell to automate things in Office 365, in Azure, onboarding processes, provisioning of new VMs, stuff like that? How can I enable people like from the support team or line of business people, so maybe even end users? And that's, of course, a challenge because typically, well, these people don't know anything about PowerShell, and you don't want to train everybody being on how to use PowerShell. And of course, we're talking about security permissions. So you obviously would not want to make these people become your global admin in your Office 365 Azure environment or in your Active Directory domain, stuff like that. So these, of course, are also kind of limiting factors, which has to do with things like the know-how bottleneck, but also about security and the question, how can I manage credentials in a secure way? How can I make sure that I don't need to have 50 domain admins in my environment so I can start delegating tasks and getting rid of them, which is, of course, one of the topics here, to say, okay, instead of me always have to run the scripts, how can I enable other people in a secure way to really make use of that? And for me, gaining time for doing other things and not just doing the the same thing over and over every day. So because of these challenges, if you look at PowerShell in its native form, it is pretty much a technology for a few experts in the organizations, which means the organizations I'm talking to, no matter if it's a couple of hundreds of people or if it's 10,000s of people, typically you maybe have 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 people who are really into PowerShell. And to enable these people and to enable using this technology to make it something that you can really use throughout your organization, that's exactly the goal of ScriptRunner. Meaning, from a very, very high level perspective, the goal is to change a landscape like this, where you have your tools, your scripts all over the place, and your modules, turning it into something that is well organized, that is secure to use, where you can exactly say, this is the tool to start the onboarding, this is the tool / scripts to manage VMware, to manage Azure, to manage Teams, Exchange Online, and all the different other platforms that, of course, you can manage with PowerShell. Now, and the way that we achieve that, and this brings us to this 5-step approach, is we start with centralizing all the scripts and modules that you might want to use, which means instead of having these scripts and modules decentralized, stored wherever they are, there is a centralized portal where you have, as a ScriptRunner admin, you have access to the scripts. Of course, in the background, you could synchronize the scripts with things like GitHub or Azure DevOps, for example. And based on this portal, you can even have a browser-based code editor, so you can make changes to scripts, you can add new scripts, you can import existing scripts into the configuration. So that's the first step to really centralizing what I like to call the PowerShell logistics, which starts with scripts and modules, which also means, let's say we want to do something with Teams, we want to do something with Exchange Online or Azure. Of course, we need to have the module. Now, in case of centralizing these things with ScriptRunner, you only need to install and maintain them in a single place, which again, of course, already simplifies the whole process. Second step, managing credentials and permissions. And of course, credential is a very, very important topic. We just learned it with what happened at Uber. So what is very important to make sure, of course, you don't have any kind of credentials anywhere near your scripts. And of course, not any hard-coded credentials. So what happens, and here in this picture is, and what it tries to show is that whenever there's a script that needs to do something in your backend system, the credentials are pulled out of the password server in real time during the execution of the script. Once the script execution has finished, no password information is stored anywhere near or locally or in the ScriptRunner server or something like this. They all, of course, stay only in the password server. And the reason why that is really important, just to kind of iterate on this Uber hack that just happened, where, of course, there, as always, if things like this happen, there is a chain of events, chain of things that needs to happen so that really the hacker can get access to important information. But one of the things were that there was a PowerShell script, obviously many PowerShell scripts on a network share, where this person got access to, and they found a script where there was a hard-coded credential of an administrative account in the password server solution, Psychotic. And based on that, of course, he got access to all kinds of data. And that's, of course, something that really, really is an absolutely no-go. There are no hard-coded credentials, has to be in a PowerShell script. And as I said in the beginning, we have this PowerShell security ebook that covers things like how to manage credentials, using execution policies, stuff like that. So again, please feel free to go to our website and get this information, so it really helps you to work with PowerShell in a secure way. Now, that's the credential part. The permissions part is also very interesting, which means, of course, as I said, we don't want to make all the people becoming administrator in your backend system. So what happens in case of when you're using ScriptRunner, all the PowerShell execution really happens only here in what we call the ScriptRunner zone. So this is where ScriptRunner is executing the scripts. This is where we have the modules, we have the credentials, we have the access to the systems that we want to manage. Now, to enable people in helpdesk, maybe even end users, here on the left side, when we talk about users, they don't need to have any access to the systems, and they also, because of that, they don't need to have any privileged permissions. And that's because these users right here, they just talk to ScriptRunner. And in ScriptRunner, you decide based on the configuration and the delegation what these people, or maybe even third-party systems, are allowed to do, starting in onboarding, maintaining user group memberships, shared mailboxes, all kind of stuff. But this happens completely outside of the actual PowerShell world. And by having these things being separated, this really helps to start, really delegating things into groups like, for example, maybe junior admins, helpdesk people, helpdesk teams, and end users. So that's the permission part and the credential part, very important. Another thing, of course, then, as I mentioned earlier on, we talk about people who maybe never heard about PowerShell. And so we need to have an easy to use interface. And what happens if you're using PowerShell together with ScriptRunner, we're automatically translating every PowerShell script into a web user interface without extra coding. So if you take a look at the picture here on the right side, this is really just an input form, and you see a couple of parameters. And so what happened here is we take a look at the synopsis in the script, we take a look at the parent block, we take a look at the ScriptRunner configuration to find out which parameters actually should be visible and which parameters should be pre-configured in the background and not being displayed to the user, which means it becomes very easy for the user because you're not confronted with 25 different parameters that they really don't have to care about. And it gives you the possibility to manage what these people are able to select, what are the predefined things, because obviously we're talking about standardized processes, meaning if we have a particular process for example, in this case, creating an out-of-office notification with templates and stuff like that, or for creating VMs, stuff like that. So this is, of course, the standardized approach that happens no matter if it's triggered by user A, B, or C, or maybe by the third-party system. It really doesn't matter. And so by simplifying this whole user experience really means nobody needs to know anything about PowerShell. If you take a look at the picture here on the right side, which is just really an input form, and I will show you a few examples how that actually looks like and how you can kind of also control the behavior of the user interface by what you're doing in your scripts. And then of course, based on that, you can start delegating, and that happens either typically based on Active Directory groups or Azure Active Directory groups. So you can define what kind of task particular people should be allowed to do. And then they are, and we will see that. So each of this action, as we call them, which is kind of use case or runbook, if you will, is represented by a tile where the user can access and start working with this with ScriptRunner. But again, without the need of any kind of PowerShell knowledge. And also very important, it's never the user who runs a script. The user, or maybe also a third-party system, tells ScriptRunner to run a script based on the input that happened by a user or by a system. And then because we have the centralized approach, we can have a comprehensive monitoring and reporting, which means you can have a complete overview about all the activities around PowerShell, which means you have the timeline here. You can see in detail which user triggered which execution, what have been the parameters. Of course, you can drill down if there are things that didn't work, so you can analyze, maybe there was some issue with the script, or that maybe there was some issues with connections to the backend system. So you have the complete overview about all the executions. And that's, of course, also something that helps if we talk about things like compliance. And of course, reporting in general. Then we have a different view on the whole automation topic, which is answering questions like, why do we even automate? How much time and money do we actually save? And so here you can see, an efficiency dashboard. So you can see how much time and money actually got saved by automating, which happens in a way that for each use case, you can define the number of minutes that you saved compared by doing things manually, and then we calculate how often this use case got triggered, and then it can be correlated also to an hourly rate. And again, a different view on using PowerShell here is a real-time monitor where you can see what happens right now, which scripts are running, and you can even cancel executions if necessary. And all these things, of course, are possible because of this centralized approach, because as I said, it's never the user that runs and executes the script. It happens in a centralized, well-managed and secure way. And that's why you can really have this comprehensive monitoring. And so these are actually the 5 steps: centralizing scripts and module, having a secure credential and permissions management, creating an easy-to-use web user interface automatically based on the script, starting to delegate to the people who you want to enable to do and to trigger certain tasks, and having a centralized monitoring possibility here. And so with this, I will switch to my demo environment so we can take a look at a few examples and to see how that actually looks like. All right, let's move this over here. Okay, so here I am in the ScriptRunner portal, and I'm logged in the role of a helpdesk person. That means I can run actions, as we call them, based on what have been delegated to me. So I cannot configure anything. I don't have access to scripts, credential, something like this. I'm only allowed to kind of consume what has been delegated to me. And that, again, being based on PowerShell, can be anything that you can do with PowerShell. So here we have a few examples with Teams, with Azure, with Active Directory, with Exchange Online. And what I also can do as a helpdesk person is I can take a look at the history of the things and the reports of the things that I've did in the past. For example, creating a report on my Azure consumption, for example, and I can go back here to the result, and maybe I can store that. I can send this via email, or I can go back. Okay, I created an Azure VM. I can see the result here, and I even could go back and see the technical details if I want to. So these are the things I can do as a helpdesk person. Now, starting with a very simple example to show you how that actually works and how simple it is, let's start with something like resetting an Active Directory password. So here, number one, you have the possibility to describe what actually happens here. Also providing some additional support, some help. So you can use markup here, markdown language. So that's really very cool, which even allows you to work with images. And if you are in a multi-language environment, you can have this information available right now in 4 different languages, like English, German, Spanish, and French. Which means whatever I'm selecting here as a language, the information changes, and you also saw that the description of the parameter changes here automatically. And I will show you how that looks in the script in a minute. Again, this comes back to how you can manage the behavior of the user interface by what you're doing in your script. So I go back to a language that I really understand. So let's go back to English. So what happens here? Okay, I can select from an OU, and then based on my selection, I can see the users in this particular OU. If I'm changing the OU, then also the selection of the user is changing. So here we have kind of a cascading queries, so to speak, where in this case, somebody who is globally responsible and should be enabled to globally work with all kinds of users in your organization can change the OU and then select from the list. And then you can see, okay, here it's about resetting a password. So I need to do the right thing, which means it has to be at least 16 characters long. I need to have a number and a special character. And as long as I'm not doing that, you can see right here in the lower left corner, the run button here is grayed out. So I need to follow the rules, and only if I'm doing that, then I can actually run this action, which I'm just click here on the run button, and now in the background, ScriptRunner is executing the scripts based on my input. Now, the way that this works, let's take a look at the script itself, which is, yeah, just a little password reset script here. And yeah, I'm still using the good old ISE. Why? Because we have a plugin here for the ISE, not yet for VS Code, but this will be available in a few weeks' time. Now, here is the script that is responsible for this password reset process. And so what you see right here, for example, this is how you can manage this multi-language scenario. So for each parameter, you can have, based on the language prefixes, you can say, okay, this is what I want to display when the user selects English or German or French or Spanish. And now in the param block right here, you can see I'm using validate pattern. I'm using regular expressions to make sure the input in this case for the password follows my company policy. And only if this really is done correctly by the user, only then I am really able to trigger this. So this helps to avoid errors. Instead of running something and then coming back with, okay, this didn't work. We checked this before something got triggered. And so as a result, so right here, because we did everything correctly, here I get an information back, which is pretty plain text. I will show you a few examples where this, of course, looks much nicer and more HTML-like look and feel, of course. But this is just to give you an overall idea how this works in general. Now, another use case might be, okay, creating a new VM in Azure. Again, here you can have a description about what actually happens right here. Again, here I have to follow some certain rules, which means in this case, my VM, the naming convention is, okay, the VMs needs to start with uppercase test dash, and then whatever I want to use. I'm selecting my operating system, and I'm selecting where I want to create this, in which Azure region, and what kind of VM sizes. Now, again, here, of course, if we delegate that, we want to make sure people are not spinning up VMs in, I don't know, in regions that doesn't make sense to you. And more importantly, they are not spinning up any VMs that might be the most expensive, yeah, Azure VMs ever. And of course, we don't want people to type like standard D2, V2, whatever, because the people will most probably not know what to type in here. So again, it's about simplifying the process and giving you the possibility to manage what's actually selectable. And of course, that might be different for different people with different scopes, maybe in different regions and different teams. So you could, of course, have a selection where maybe some people can create VMs with bigger sizes because they have some business need for it. And what you can do is you can just then make a copy of this action and delegate this to the right people with the right selection options. The nice thing about that, you don't need to change anything in your script. So instead of trying to manage these different scenarios by changing scripts, or maybe even worse, by copying a script and then making changes to it and using that for these people, in the background, the script is always staying the same. And on top of the scripts, you have ScriptRunner as a management layer. And this is where you decide what kind of selections a user should be allowed to do. And then, okay, I can start again triggering that in the background. A third example here, coming back to something like Exchange Online, maybe out of office notification management, meaning somebody calls in sick. How can I enable somebody to activate an out-of-office notification without giving this person the full access to the mailbox or running to the IT department and could you please do this for me and stuff like that. So here you could enable people in HR saying, okay, somebody calls in sick and I have a already predefined notification template for that. And because in the script, I have a date time parameter, it's automatically being translated into this date picker or date time picker if necessary. And then again, if I've done everything correctly, I can then trigger the execution again. So these are just a few examples. Now, what you could also do is you could say, okay, this kind of use cases, I would like to make accessible via maybe an already existing self-service portal. So what you can do is for each of these use cases, you could put them and integrate them into any kind of website. Could be a SharePoint website, could be an ITSM solution, or as I said, maybe an already existing self-service portal. So based on an iframe, you could say, okay, this action will become available. Of course, and the user has to authenticate, so we can check, is this user allowed to trigger this action? Of course, so the same security applies as in the portal. But here, it becomes even easier to access these possibilities. And again, by looking at this interface, nobody needs to know anything about PowerShell, which also means nobody needs to know anything about ScriptRunner, even in this case. That means, again, based on PowerShell, that could be anything. It could be maybe managing VM snapshots or databases or whatever. So the possibilities are kind of endless based on what you can do with your underlying PowerShell scripts, right? Okay, so how do you manage that? And now I'm going to switch the role and let's take a look at this whole scenario from an admin perspective. And so here I'm logged in the portal. This time I'm logged in the portal as an administrator. And because of that, I have a centralized dashboard where I can see the reports, I can see what got triggered, I can see the license information, stuff like that. And I can manage all the different topics and things that I need to be able to actually use PowerShell in this centralized way, which starts with the scripts. So here I have the list of all the scripts that are available to me. And for example, I can use the filter and let's say I only want to see my scripts that are tagged based on Azure. And so I can maybe look for the script that creates my machines. And so I can take a look at the parameters and I can also take a look at the code. I can also check out the scripts. I could make some changes to it. I can check in the script again. And which also means you can take a look at the change history. You can see, okay, what has been changed. You could even go back to a previous version and you can see where this particular script is actually being used, in which use cases. So that's I think, a very cool thing by being able to work with the scripts based on this portal, based on the web browser. And it also allows you to, of course, to have a scenario where you want to have multiple people contributing and working with scripts. And which actually, by the way, also means you can have multiple teams and ownerships inside of the configuration to make sure that, for example, the Exchange guys are not messing around with the Azure scripts or the SharePoint scripts and stuff like that. So you can be pretty granular when it comes to the permissions inside of the configuration here, or you can create a new script, or you can import existing scripts, including using the scripts that we provide on our GitHub repository, which I mentioned in the beginning, like these 1800 scripts or something, and you can take a look at the script itself, and then it gets imported, and you can start using it. The second step, what else do we need? Of course, credentials. And the credentials are again stored locally here. And I have a mix of credentials that are stored on the ScriptRunner server in the Windows credential store. And I have credentials that are stored in a password server, in my case, in a Pleasant server, which means instead of having the actual credential, it's just the ID, which means we use the ID later on if this credential is being used to ask the password server to get the credential in real time when there's a script that needs to go out and doing something in my backend system. All right. And the targets, the credentials are being used in what we call targets. And the targets are the actual systems that you want to manage. Again, follows what you can do with PowerShell, like local execution, PowerShell remoting, all kinds of cloud targets, obviously including Azure and Office 365. And so inside of these targets, for example, if we go to this, maybe for this, to this Exchange example here, you can say, okay, what kind of system do we want to manage and what is the credential that we're going to use? Which means having this in the configuration, there's no need to have this information anywhere near in your script. So this simplifies the whole concept of working with your scripts and simplifying the whole process of maintaining your scripts. And you can have an unlimited number of these targets, again, for all kinds of use cases. As you can see here, I have examples for Azure, for Exchange, for Office 365, and stuff like that. So we have the scripts, credentials, and we have configured the targets that we want to manage. And with this, I can create what we call an action. And the action kind of brings together all these bits and pieces like scripts, like credentials, like targets, and make it something that you can really start to delegate. And if we, for example, go back to what we just did with creating this Azure VM, if I'm looking at this from the configuration perspective, we can see, for example, that there are many parameters that we didn't see as a user because there are all kinds of parameters where we said, okay, this is our default behavior. And then we said, and then we want to hide that because the user doesn't need to change that. There's no need to show it. So it's just, you just show the input and the parameter that really needs the interaction with the user. Everything else happens automatically in the background. And then we saw a list of Azure locations. We saw a list of VMs that we could select, which means instead of just having an input field, which we don't want because people could type any kind of crazy stuff and make errors, we have queries. And queries are a very important aspect of making sure people are enabled to do the right things. They don't have to type. They cannot kind of, like in this case, spin up VMs in the wrong region, stuff like that. A very important aspect of having these guidelines for the users. And then once you've done that, you can say, okay, now everything is fine. I'm going to delegate that to the right group of people. And so that, of course, is true for all kinds of use cases. And then on top of that, you might have scenarios where you want to schedule things, where you say, okay, I have the need to create reports, to do housekeeping processes on a regular basis. And then you can say, okay, this use case runs every Friday, or maybe it should run every 10 minutes. And I want to send out an email notification so I get a result back, no matter if it was successful or maybe if there was an issue. So this enables you to kind of get rid of this maybe decentralized task scheduling stuff that happens all over the place, and you never know if things are really happening the way that you want it. And the third way of triggering the scripts is using connectors, allowing other systems to also trigger the execution. And that is based on REST connectors, which means as long as a third-party system is able to talk REST, and it could be SAP, could be ServiceNow, could be Jira, could be SharePoint workflow, Power Apps, whatever. You can enable these systems to connect to ScriptRunner and automatically trigger the execution. Of course, the system has to authenticate, so we know and can check if the system is allowed to do what it tries to do. And so we have the three ways of triggering scripts: interactively, scheduled, and automatically and event-driven based on connectors. And all these activities, again, of course, they become available in the reports. So here, now I'm in the admin context. I can see that, okay, there was this user Tina, and she created this out of office notification. I can go into the details. I can see the parameters, which also maybe, especially in this use case, might be interesting. You might see here in the parameter here, there is actually a variable called end date, which we automatically translate into the actual selected date that the user in the user interface selected, which in this case, for example, makes sure that the text of the notifications are always up to date compared to, okay, I'm changing the start end date, but I forget to modify my text. And then it tells something about maybe I will be back in December 2021. So just as a few example here. And then, yeah, you can filter saying, okay, I only want to see where something went wrong. And then I want to analyze to find out, okay, why there was an issue. And again, of course, you can also have a look at the efficiency dashboard, meaning you want to see, okay, how much time and money did we save by automating all different use cases here? And that happens based on the statistics here, where you are able to say, okay, based on the compared to the manual approach, we save 5 minutes, and then we calculate how often this action got triggered, and then we come up with the time number, and also then, of course, based on the hourly rate, to the cost savings. All right, yeah. So this, I think, I was trying to show you what is possible based on this great PowerShell technology, and enable people to work with it without maybe even knowing it. And so if we kind of summarize what ScriptRunner is, and what I showed you is, you can standardize, automate, and delegate all kinds of recurring tasks as long as it's possible with PowerShell. And you have these 3 ways of triggering the scripts: interactive, scheduled, and event-driven. You can use the monitoring to see exactly what happened. You can use the live monitor to see what's happening right now. And all that is possible because we're centralizing the scripts and modules. We have a centralized and secure way of managing the credentials. And last but not least, we automatically create this user interface. And yeah, so if you like what you saw, you can start using and testing our solution. You can go to our website, scriptrunner.com. I would also be happy if you have some individual questions or requirements, and I'm going to put the link also here in the chat. Feel free to book a session with me. I would be happy to talk about what you are facing when in regards to automation and automation challenges. Also, you might be interested in the latest product review that have been done for SysOps. I'm also going to put that into the chat. They tested our latest version, the ScriptRunner Portal Edition R4. And in case you are visiting the Experts Live next week in the Netherlands, I will be there together with a colleague, and I'm also going to have a session there. And if you are going to Mainz next week to the European Cloud Summit, we will be there as well. And if you have questions that you might want to ask, you could join our Ask Me Anything session, which happens just in kind of more of an hour at 5 p.m. Central European Time. You can join our ScriptRunner YouTube channel and ask questions. And of course, feel free to get in touch with me if you have additional questions regarding PowerShell, regarding ScriptRunner, or automation. And I'm just looking into the chat if there are any questions. There are no questions at the moment. So I'm just looking at, did I also put my contact info into the chat? I'm just doing it again, just to be on the safe side. So again, if you have any additional questions, requests, or when it comes to using PowerShell or automating, automating all the things, feel free to get in touch with me. I will be happy to answer your questions. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and the usual social channels. All right, so with this, if there are no questions, thanks a lot for attending the session. I hope you got some useful information in regards to automating things with PowerShell and how you can get rid of this repetitive task by using PowerShell together with ScriptRunner. All right. So again, thanks a lot. Have fun with the rest of the Cloudeight sessions and maybe see you soon. Bye.
Thank you, Heiko. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. You take care.